Hi there, fight fans. My name is Kian Lang. Welcome to Calf Kick Sports in a little bit of a different location today, but needs must. We had to come in to sit down to discuss an incredible upcoming week of fights we've got in the UFC. Of course, I'm talking about UFC Abu Dhabi. As we're used to with the way that Abu Dhabi works in the UFC, this is a particularly exciting card to get into. A fight night that could easily be a pay-per-view with a main event that could have potential middleweight title implications. Of course, Robert Whittaker taking on Reinier the Ritter. So let's look ahead. We'll start off with the first fight of the night, a bantamweight clash between two veterans. We're looking at Davey Grant, who's 14-7 through his career, taking on Blackshear, 17-7-1. Like I said, these two guys, they have experience that not many have. Looking at Blackshear's last time out, he took on Alatengi with the incredibly difficult name to say that hopefully I won't have to say again in a future video. But he went out there and he put in a real surprising performance, one that maybe we're not used to seeing out of Blackshear. We're used to the grappling, the submission game, 11 submissions in his career, and he went out there and he did something a little bit different. He kept it standing for virtually all 15 minutes and he won that stand-up fight. Now in this one, I believe he needs a different game plan because on the other side of the cage, he's an experienced veteran. Like I said, 14-7, 39 years of age. Davey Grant has truly been there and done it. He's got wins over the likes of Chito Vera, Jonathan Martinez, Rafael Assunção with that incredible last second reverse triangle that he threw up, I believe, one of only 2 or 3 in UFC history. And that really sums up Davey Grant to me. He's a man that you can never really predict. He's a guy who can pull out moves out of the hat, moves that other guys just simply don't know to throw. Like I said, at 39 years old, this guy's has seen it all inside the cage. And he's going to be a real tough fight for anyone, and especially Blackshear. I look at Blackshear, and of course, like I said in his last fight, we saw some development, some growth from Blackshear, but ultimately, the goal will always be the same for a guy like this. He wants to take it to the ground, and he wants to put his opponent in tough submissions that they won't be able to find their way out of. But Davey Grant, he knows how to handle himself on the ground. Like I said, he landed that reverse triangle. That shows a high level of grappling that just not many guys have. So I think this is a very interesting matchup. I think look for Grant to do what he did last time out against Ramon Tavares in UFC Tampa, to push the pace, to avoid the big shots and land some big shots of his own. He's a bit of an awkward striker. He throws from some difficult angles to work out, and he's got a big right hand that he can land at any time. So I think this is a dangerous fight for Blackshear, but ultimately, I look at the age difference. Grant 39, Blackshear only 30, really coming into his prime. And I think a lot of the time that when we see an age difference like that, you lean the younger fighter. So for me, looking ahead to this one, I leaned them on Blackshear. I think it's going to be a very close fight. Don't take this prediction as gospel because I'm maybe 60-40 on Blackshear by decision. But I'm very excited for this one. I think it kicks off the card in a superb way. And now looking ahead to the second fight of the night, maybe a little bit of a step down in a lot of people's opinions. Mohammed Yahya, the hometown fighter, fighting out the UAE. Not many guys do, but this guy does. And he's going to be facing off with Stephen Nguyen in the featherweight division. Now, to be honest, both these guys need a lot of improvements from their last time out. Stephen Nguyen went out there against Jerno Aarons, and he took a tough loss. It was his UFC debut, okay, the nerves might have been there. Maybe this one, he'll be a little bit freer having that experience, but it wasn't his best performance. And as for Mohammed Yahya, on the other side, he went out there and got knocked out in the very first round by Caio Fernandez. Now, granted, Fernandez is quite a good level of fighter, but I think it was the manner of Yahya's performance that led many to question whether he's worthy of a place in the UFC. And I think for him, this might be that final opportunity, fighting in his home country, his home city. I think he's going to go out there and I think he's going to be desperate. I think he's going to have a lot more urgency about him. And will that translate to a win? I'm not sure, but I think we should get at least a better performance from Yahya. On the other side, Stephen Nguyen, I look for him to establish that jab, control the range, control the tempo of the fight. And I think if he does all those things, he could ease to a decision victory here. I'm going Stephen Nguyen. And looking ahead to the next one, this is one of the most exciting fights of the night. Marcus Buchecha making his UFC debut against the 13th ranked Martin Buday. Buchecha has been a name that has been floating around as a possible signing for the UFC for quite some time now, and they finally got it done. And I think it comes at a perfect time. You look at the heavyweight division, it's in a real state of of calm almost. And I think we need some chaos being added. And buchecha might just be that chaos. Of course, you know, from the Francis Ngannou contract dispute to the Stipe Miocic sort of layoff, he wasn't really that active up there in age as a champion. And then John Jones, and, you know, we don't need to get into that. I think that's been spoken about enough. But, you know, all the palaver that's been going on with him over the past couple of years, this division has really come to a crashing halt. And it's sad to see, you know. So for the UFC, buchecha is a big statement signing that could come in, breathe life into this division, and really get it back up and running. But for buchecha, this is no easy debut, you know. A lot of the times you'll see these guys coming over from different organizations, and many people feel they get layups in their first fight. This is not that case. Martin Buday is a guy with great experience and great skills inside the cage. His only loss coming against the Shamil Gaziev. And I mean, come on, Shamil Gaziev, he's one of the GOATs now. So we've got to excuse that one, surely. But looking at buchecha, he's a guy who wants to take this down to the ground. And that is his world. This guy is high level jiu-jitsu. Buday is no slouch. He has 100% takedown defense in the UFC. And when it hits the mat, he's more than capable, but I think for me, there's levels to it. You know, you look at a guy like Charles Oliveira, that's a different level of jiu-jitsu. Look at a guy like Damian Maia, like Gilbert Burns, it's a different level of jiu-jitsu. Now, Marcus buchecha is not the level of those guys. However, comparatively, for the heavyweight division, I think you're going to see a real discrepancy in the grappling. So look for buchecha to try and drag this one to the ground, use that physicality, use that size that he possesses, and ultimately land the submission on Buday. Now, granted, Buday, he trains with Tom Aspinall. He trains with, in my opinion, one of the best MMA grapplers of all time, Mr. Phil DeFries, the KSW champion. So he's no slouch on the mat. But like I said, there's levels to it, and I think we're going to see that in this one. I'm going buchecha by submission. Moving on, we've got an exciting, enthralling welterweight bout that, to me, is going to end in fireworks. I don't see another way this fight ends. Carlos Leal taking on the 41-year-old, yes, 41 years old, Muslim Salikhov. Now, first things first, let's get the elephant in the room out of the way. It's kind of amazing that Carlos Leal has chosen to fight in Abu Dhabi again and actually accepted this one. Last time he was here, he had what was, in my opinion, the biggest robbery in UFC history, taking a split decision loss to Reinier Fakhretdinov. I think to sum up that fight, I was watching it at home with my friends. And when it went to a split, we all sort of looked at each other like, this can't be right? Like, surely not. Like, have I heard that wrong? And then when they read out Fakhretdinov won, it was just pandemonium. You couldn't believe the robbery. So for Leal, I think he might go out there and want to leave the judges out of it this time, just to be safe. And we saw him do exactly that in his last fight. He took on another UFC veteran in Alex Morono, and he landed sickening blows inside the clinch. This guy has power no matter where this fight takes place. And I think for a guy like Muslim Salikhov, that's a real danger. Now, granted, Salikhov will come into this one with a lot of confidence, and he'll really be feeling himself. You know, even despite 41 years old, most guys have retired long before then, and if they're still going, they're almost a shell of their former selves. But not Muslim Salikhov. This guy is riding on a 2-fight win streak with wins over Santiago Ponzinibbio, who, of course, another UFC veteran and really legend at this point, and Kenan Song. So Salikhov will be feeling good about himself, especially after the spinning wheel kick that we saw him land last time out. I don't know if he'll be able to do that once again here, but hey, anything's possible in this sport. But for me, I look at a guy like Carlos Leal, and this is just, once again, we spoke about it on the buchecha fight, it's a different level. And for Leal, it's not the grappling, it's the power. This guy must have stones in his hands, in his knees, in his elbows, in his feet, because when he hits people, they react differently. I mean, you look at Leal, he's built almost like a ninja turtle. That back of his is just incredible. This guy is one of the most built, blocky guys in the division. And when he hits people, like I said, they just go down. And unfortunately for a guy like Muslim Salikhov, he's a guy I like a lot. I respect a lot. You know, like I said, 41 years old. To still be at this level is something you have to admire. But I think this just might be one mountain too tall for him to climb. So I'm going to go Leal, and I'm going to go by knockout. That's definitely my pick for that one. And to be honest, I mean, there's no sure thing, but I'm pretty confident on that one. I mean, that'll come back to bite me, no doubt. But anyway, moving on to the next one, we've got Amanda Ribas taking on Tabatha Ricci. This is the only female MMA fight taking place on the card, and I think it's a really good one, you know. We were looking at two women that have really become faces of this sport, you know, synonymous with this division. They've never really reached the heights that they hope to face, but their names we're used to seeing in big fights, taking on big opponents. and performing well. Now, granted, both these women are coming off tough losses last time out. For Amanda Ribas, it's 2 straight losses. She fought Mackenzie Dern last as a big favourite, and unfortunately, she came up short. And before that, she faced off with Rosie Namajunas, and again, she came up short. But really, there's no shame in either of those losses. You look at Mackenzie Dern, she's just one of the best there is in this sport. And you look at Rose Namajunas, a former champion and really going to be a Hall of Famer one day. So I think she can take a lot of positives from those fights, but there's certainly areas to improve. And on the flip side, Tabatha Ricci, there weren't many positives from her last fight. She went out there against Zhao Jianan. Hopefully I've got her name right. It's a difficult one to say, I'll be honest with you, but she went out there and she got dominated from start to finish. There's no easy way to put it. From minute 1 to minute 15, it was never really that close. And I think, taking a loss like that when you're 30 years old, it can be quite damaging to the confidence. It can take a lot to rebuild, refocus and re-energize yourself for future. So it's going to be very interesting to see the mindset of Tabatha Ricci here. And I think that's going to be important. She's a fighter who's obviously very built, very strong for the division. And it's that physical presence that she brings to fights that often can prove the difference. And I think, Tabatha Ricci at the best in my mind is a woman who walks fighters down, pressures them, puts them up against the fence and lands big takedowns and then goes to work from there. So if she can do that, then I think she could be very successful. But, with Amanda Ribas, that's really easier said than done. And for me, I just lean Ribas here. I think she has the know-how. I think she has the experience. And I think she'll just prove to be a little bit too good. But really, you can go either way with this one. For me, Ribas, but I won't blame you if you go for Tabatha Ricci. There's definitely reasons for and against both one of them winning. So we'll see how it goes. And following on from that one, we have back-to-back light heavyweight clashes. The first, your typical grappler taking on a striker. It's Ibo Aslan taking on Billy Elekana. Now, this one's very tough to pick, I'll be honest. I see 2 clear methods of victory. The easy pick, if you want to look at it that way, is for this fight not to go to the distance. These guys love to finish fights. You look at Ibo Aslan, he's the definition of a knockout artist. He came into the UFC, back-to-back knockouts, most recently of Rafael Sequeira, and he was sort of flying high. There was a lot of hype behind him. A lot of people thought, well, this guy's just going to go in there with anyone and land a big shot and that'll be it. Unfortunately, MMA doesn't go that way, and he found that out the hard way in his last time out against Ion Kutalaba, a guy who's been in there with the likes of Khalil Roundtree, Magomed Ankalaev, Modestas Bukauskas really recently. He is so experienced, and it was that experience, that know-how, that ability to change levels that ultimately proved costly. And I think we saw the real hole in Ibo Aslan's game, and it was in the grappling. Kutalaba was able to take him down, dominate him, and eventually land the submission in the very first round. And no disrespect to Kutalaba, but he's not the most prestigious of grapplers that Ibo Aslan is going to face. And I think to see the dominance at which Kutalaba put him away, it'll raise big warning signs and questions and red flags going into this one, because on the opposite side of the cage is a man in Billy Elekana that in his UFC debut showed that he is more than capable of taking a guy down, taking the back, and potentially landing a submission. Of course, his debut, short notice against Bogdan Guskov. And, I think going into that fight, a lot of people didn't really give Elekana a chance. They thought that a guy like Guskov, we're going to talk about him just coming up here soon. We're going to talk about the ability of him. He's one of the best there is. He's really high level, and a guy that I think we could see compete in the top 10 and maybe even the top 5 of this division. So for Elekana to go out there on short notice, to take down Guskov, take the back of Guskov, and to get so close to landing submission, I think shows a lot about the skill and the talent. Now, granted, unfortunately for Elekana, he went out there in the second round, and whether it was the short notice, whether it was the pace of the first round, I think it might have been a combination of both, but the pace really slowed, and there were signs that his cardio was really lacking, and Guskov was able to take advantage and eventually lock in a submission. So, look, when you look at this fight, I think there's clear ways to victory for both guys. For Elekana, it's taking Aslan down and exploiting those holes in the grappling and maybe locking in submission. And on the flip side, for Ibo Aslan, it's do as you've always done. It's keep the fight standing, keep at your range, and that knockout blow will come, because Elekana's strength, to me, is definitely in the grappling. So I think if this one stays standing, look for Ibo Aslan to land something big and get the knockout. Moving on, I mentioned that we'd be speaking about Bogdan Guskov, and the time has come. He's facing off in the featured prelim of the night. Many thought it was going to move up to the main card. I've checked before this. This is on the Monday I'm recording this, so if it's changed from now, don't blame me. This is the featured prelim. The flyweights are taking the opening spot on the main card. But looking at this fight, I mean, Nikita Krylov, what can you say? This is a 40-fight veteran in the game, 30-10, 11-8 in the UFC. I mean, 19 fights in the UFC. Not many guys make it to that. And to make it to that, you have to be at a high level. But the real question is this the Nikita Krylov that made it, that advanced up the ranks, that made it to the rankings, that had great performances, you know? Since 2023, this guy had a 2-year layoff. He came back out in April at UFC 314, and he faced off with another man who had taken a big layoff earlier in his career, and Dominic Reyes, a guy who's having a resurgence of sorts. And many going into that fight were the real questions, the real interest was what Nikita Krylov is going to show up. You know, 2 years off for anyone, it doesn't matter who you are, John Jones, you know, Conor McGregor, whoever you want to say, George St. Pierre. It's so difficult to come back from. And some guys can, but not many. And unfortunately for Krylov, we saw him go out there and have a really, really uncharacteristic performance. He rushed in at Reyes, hands down, and he got clipped. He got caught and he got put to sleep in the very first round. And for me, I think if a guy, you know, goes through that layoff, has such a tough and brutal knockout like that, I'd like to see them maybe take a step back, maybe rethink. Krylov's gone the other way. He's gone straight back in here. This is just 3 months after. And I think the real question of this one is how is that chin going to be effective? Because on the other side, Bogdan Guskov hits hard. He hits from awkward angles. He's such an awkward striker. I mean, you watch this guy. We're used to in MMA, a 1-2, a jab, maybe a teep up the middle, maybe a cross, a left hook, a right hook, you know, basic sort of stuff. This guy doesn't really throw that. He throws weird shovel uppercuts, jabs from awkward angles. He'll come at you from all sort of areas. It's very difficult to track a guy like Guskov down. And as I mentioned before, when he hits the mat, he's got real ability down there too. So I think for Krylov, the big question mark is how is that chin going to hold up? And for Guskov, can you test that chin early and can you crack it? And for me, I think he can. I think I go Guskov here. And I think I go in by knockout. Maybe not in the first, but look for that second round for him to push the pace and eventually land something big. So that's the prelims. I think for me, the prelim to really pay attention to the most, I'm going with the opener. Davey Grant, Damon Blackshear. Maybe I'm a little biased because Davey Grant's in it, the Englishman, and I'm a big fan of Damon Blackshear too. But hey, I think that's going to be a potential fight of the night. I think it's going to be two guys that go to war. So look for that one to be a real banger and make sure you're in your seat for that one. And now, getting to the main card, kicking it off with a fight that's been rescheduled now. Almabayev was meant to be taking on Ramazan Temirov, and unfortunately, Temirov, there's been some rumors, some reports. It seems like he did take some performance-enhancing drugs. We'll see what really comes out from it, but whatever the case, he is out, and in steps Jose Ochoa, a man who fought not long ago back in June at UFC Atlanta and had such a special performance that night. He went out there against a grizzly veteran like Cody Durden, a guy who's so hard to put away. You know, we saw when Cody fought Joshua Van landed punch after punch after punch after punch, and Durden simply would not give in and back down. So I think for Ochoa to go out there and do what he did in a fight that had some beef behind it, some bad blood, speaks to the volumes of this guy and the level of this guy. And you really can't be surprised. You know, this is a guy who trains at the world-renowned Shooter Box gym. You know, there's no real slouches training there. And we saw in his UFC debut, he may have come up short, but he faced off with Lonnie Kavanagh, who is now, you know, many, myself included, are thinking a title might be in that guy's future. So I think for Ochoa, it's two impressive performances. Can he make it a third? You know, short notice, this is going to be a much more difficult challenge because facing off with him is a guy who's ninth ranked, who's had some massive wins in his career. You know, the likes of CJ Vergara, Ode Osborne, Mateus Nicolau, Almabayev really can beat them all. This is a grappling specialist. Now, granted, there's some criticism of Asu because when he takes it down to the ground, there's maybe not enough urgency to finish these fights. And I think if he does that against a guy like Ochoa, who is as relentless as they come, is a guy who wants to go forward, is a guy who wants to push the pace, I think that could work against Almabayev. So I'd love to see some adjustments from him there, and adjustments especially from his last performance, because last time out against Manal Cap, he didn't really do himself justice. You know, it was a big moment for Almabayev. You know, his first main event in the UFC, taking on a guy like Manal Cap. and he came up short. But I think in this one, the experience, the grappling, I expect Almabayev to come out on top. And looking ahead past that, we have one of the biggest stars up and coming in the UFC, Shara Bullet Magomedov. He's back, of course, in Abu Dhabi, the only place he's sanctioned to fight due to him having that one eye. But the Pirate is going out there and facing off with another veteran on this card, Mr. Marc-Andre Barriault, a guy who seemed to be really nearing the end of his career, with all due respect. I mean, 3 back-to-back losses. Chris Curtis comfortably beaten by decision. Joe Pyfer put him out in one. And then Dustin Stoltzfus put him out in one. I may have butchered that name, bear with me. It seemed like many felt the chin was gone. And it seemed like maybe the end was coming for Barriault. But he went out there in UFC 315 in Montreal, his home country, of course, of Canada. And he put on a performance, knocking out Bruno Silva, a brutal knockout up close, landing vicious elbows. I mean, Silva was unconscious after that for 6-7 minutes, eventually being stretched off. It was a real scary sight to see. You know, I was there in the arena that night at the Bell Center, and there was a real air of, goodness me, what have I just watched? You know, in the audience, it was a shocking knockout, and spoke to the levels and resilience of Barriault. You know, he seemed locked in that night. It seemed like a different Marc-Andre Barriault, and he'll need a similar sort of performance here to take down, I mean, one of the most special prospects in the sport. Because a guy like Shara Bullet, you can't be at an 8 out of 10 to beat him. You can't even be maybe at a 9 out of 10. You have to be perfect on the night. This guy is one of the best counter strikers and cleanest counter strikers this sport has ever seen. You know, yes, he came up short in his last fight, but I think that was a fight that really played against the strengths of Shara Bullet. You know, we're used to seeing him stay on the outside, stay at range, staying patient, letting the other guy come forward and really apply the pressure, and he's there to pick them off on the counter. And I think a guy like MVP was really never going to hand that to him. And I think we saw the potential weaknesses of Shara Bullet. But here, getting a guy like Barriault, who loves to go forward, who, yes, has the ability to grapple, but really chooses not to. He prefers to keep it standing. He wants to go out there, put a pace on you, and throw heavy volume. And I think against a guy like Shara Bullet Magomedov, that might just work against Barriault. So I'm going to go out on a whim and say that I am nearly 100% confident in this pick. Again, it could come back to bite me, but for me, Shara Bullet Magomedov is just too slick, too good, and too powerful for Barriault. I'm expecting him to go out there and land the knockout. 3 fights left, and we get one of the most special characters in the UFC in the next one. Bryce Mitchell taking on Saeed Nurmagomedov. Now, for Bryce Mitchell, this is a huge fight in his career. He's 17-3 as a professional. Those 3 losses coming against a similar sort of opponent, short but stocky and big for the featherweight division. You know, first Ilia Topuria slept him on the ground. Then Josh Emmett landed one of the most brutal knockouts you will ever see. And most recently, again at UFC 314, he took on Gene Silva, and he wasn't particularly close from start to finish. I mean, Silva went out there and sort of did what he wanted. He was able to land kicks, wheel kicks, punches. He was almost laughing in the face of Mitchell at times. Of course, there was a lot of bad blood going into that fight. He took him down. He knocked him down, and eventually he landed a slick ninja choke in the second round, putting Mitchell out. And for Mitchell, I think this move to bantamweight comes at a good time. He's done all he can at featherweight. I think he's just too small for that division. And at bantamweight, it really could benefit him. I think, of course, the one knock and the one question mark and red flag to me will be the cardio. You know, we saw some real problems for Mitchell. Like I said, in the Silva fight, he slowed down in that fight in the second round, and weight cutting is never easy for the gas tank. So will he be able to deal with that weight cut and still be able to go 3 rounds? We'll see. But if he can't, then the man who he's facing off with will be more than ready to take him down and finish this fight. Saeed Nurmagomedov is as good as it gets in the bantamweight division. Now, he had a similar tough fight his last time out, really being shocked and upset by Vinicius Oliveira, a man who we saw this past weekend take care of Kyler Phillips in crazy fashion. I mean, that guy is something else, but less about him and more about Nurmagomedov. He's long, he's rangy, he's durable. He's never been finished in his career despite taking 3 tough losses. And Nurmagomedov, I think the main thing to watch for in this fight is that front choke. You know, with these long, rangy, skinny guys, you often see them be able to lock up chokes far more slick and easier than some of the shorter guys. And we did just see Bryce Mitchell get choked out in a similar sort of position from that ninja choke, and Saeed has a slick front choke, so could be a bad sort of mix. But I think something to watch for here is the takedown defense of Nurmagomedov. Now, this may not be expected, especially, he's got that last name. He trains with those guys. You'd have thought he'd be great in the grappling, but 62%, that shows signs of weakness. And for Mitchell, I think that's an area he has to try and exploit. If this fight stays standing, it's not going to be particularly close. I think the range, the size of Nurmagomedov, I think that could play a real problem for Mitchell. Mitchell is probably going to be bigger, but I just think that length and that build of Nurmagomedov is such a problem on the feet. So for Mitchell, it's going to be the normal. Pressure him against the cage, try and land a takedown, see what he can do from there. But for me, I think Nurmagomedov is too good on the ground to be finished down there and too good on the feet to be threatened up there. So for me, I'm going to go with Nurmagomedov by decision. Our new co-main of the evening, of course, it was supposed to be Movsar Evloev taking on UFC newcomer Aaron Pico. Unfortunately, Evloev is out, injured. There's rumours it might be on UFC 319, so we'll see. But in steps Petr Yan and Marcus McGhee. Now, on paper, this is a bit of a crazy matchup. It's the 3-ranked guy taking on the 13th ranked guy. That doesn't often happen. Not least of all, after that 3rd-ranked guy has just come off wins against Davison Figueiredo and Song Yadong. But Petr Yan, it kind of sums up his character. Most guys would sit, wait, and hope for an opportunity in either a number 1 contenders fight or a title fight. That's not Petr Yan. This is a guy who wants to be active. He wants to be in that cage. He thrives being in that cage. And he's willing to take on a big risk here because Marcus McGhee is 10-1, 4-0 in the UFC. And he's coming off a really clean performance and is a guy who can put you out at any time in the fight. This is a guy with legit knockout power, 1-punch knockout power. And Petr Yan will have to mind his P's and Q's here to avoid those big shots of McGhee. Now, in terms of McGhee, his last performance, Jonathan Martinez, it was a comfortable decision win until it wasn't really in that 3rd round. Everything seemed to be plain sailing. He was doing what he wanted. Martinez was very, very strangely inactive in that fight, throwing very low volume of strikes. And McGhee sort of had his way with him for 2 rounds. But in that 3rd round, we saw a potential weakness for McGhee. The calf kicks of Martinez started to take over. He landed some huge, vicious calf kicks that completely destabilized McGhee and left him really running for his life for the final 4 or 5 minutes of that fight. He barely made it out of the win by the end of it. And I think for a guy like Petr Yan, who of course we know he throws that low kick as good as anyone in this division, I think that's going to be an area that he looks to exploit early and often. Now, I think the strength for McGhee here will be that it's 3 rounds. If this was a 5-rounder, I don't think it would be particularly close down the stretch. A guy like Yan is so used to going those 5 rounds and tough 5 rounds. And for McGhee, we've seen some issues with the gas tank, but 3 rounds makes it interesting. And early McGhee will have a chance to land something big and sort of shock the world. And, with a win here, incredibly, we may be looking at Marcus McGhee getting a UFC title shot. I mean, can you believe that? Who'd have thought we'd be saying that 2 years ago? But that's the reality of this situation, and that's the beauty of this sport. Anyone can do anything at any time. Now, having said that, I'm going to have to crush those hope and dreams here. I think Petr Yan is too good. His boxing is just so slick. It's arguably the best in the sport, maybe along the likes of Ilia Topuria, Max Holloway, and the list goes on. But Petr Yan is really the best of the best here. He only loses to the elite of this sport. And for me, I don't think Marcus McGhee is quite there yet. It remains to be seen, but for me, I'll go Petr Yan. And now that brings us to the main event of the evening. Robert Whittaker, the 5th ranked middleweight, taking on RDR, Reinier the Ridder, the 12th ranked middleweight. What a matchup this is. Reinier the Ridder has come into the UFC off the back of being a double champion, 1 championship. There was a lot of hype around him and really a lot of pressure, a lot of uncertainty. And after his first fight against Gerald Meerschaert, none of that really went away. He landed the submission in the 3rd round, but there were a lot of holes in the performance. It wasn't particularly impressive. Now it all comes out afterwards. His camp was a bit messed up and this and that and this and that. But whatever the reason, it wasn't his best performance. And fans were sort of questioning whether he was ready for the UFC. Those questions went away pretty quickly because his second fight in the organization was the wild man, Kevin Holland. He went out there and submitted him in the very first round. And then most recently at UFC Des Moines back in May, he took on the sport's biggest prospect, Bo Nickel, and he destroyed him. He was able to dominate the grappling against one of the best wrestlers in this sport. And then in the second round, when it came to the stand-up, we saw big improvements from RDR. He landed big knees up against the cage and eventually put Bo Nickal out. Now, many will say it was a bad performance by Nickal, but take nothing away from RDR. He went out there and did what he did and did it in impressive fashion. Robert Whittaker is the man that he's taken on in this one with a huge opportunity. I mean, a win for RDR and a statement finish. He could be one away from a title shot. For Whittaker, this is a case of really letting people know who you are, reminding them who you are. Last time out, he took on Khamzat Chimaev, the beast, the mauler, and unfortunately for him, he got chewed up and spat out in a round, having his jaw brutally crushed by the pressure of Chimaev. That's a loss that can play on your mind. You know, Whittaker, he's taken some tough losses recently. Of course, before that, he knocked down Ikram Aliskerov, and it seemed like a title shot maybe on the way. You know, a win against Chimaev, he'd have been there. And taking another setback, you know, is the passion there? Is the drive there? I think it is. And I think we're going to see Robert Whittaker go out there and give his all. But there's some real issues in this fight for me with Whittaker. You know, I think the guys that we've seen him struggle with the most have been big, physical men for 185 pounds. Think of Khamzat Chimaev, think of Dricus du Plessis, think of, you know, maybe not the biggest in terms of build, but tall in terms of Israel Adesanya. And Whittaker's really struggled, especially that du Plessis fight. The pressure and the size and the takedown and then the pressure on the feet of du Plessis, it all seemed to be too much for Whittaker, and he eventually crumbled to the canvas in the second round. And, you know, those comparisons between du Plessis and Derrida are really, you know, they're granted. They're very similar builds. Derrida is huge for this division. I don't think people realize just how big this man is. He is 6'4". He'll have, I believe, a 5-inch reach advantage. This guy is massive, and I think that could be really costly for Whittaker. I see Derrida pulling off, maybe it'll be a little bit of an upset. I expect him to be an underdog, but at plus money, I'd be putting my money right with RDR. I think he's going to go out there, he's going to drag the Aussie to the canvas, and he's going to get a statement win and a statement finish to set himself up for a potential number one contenders fight down the line. Now, whatever the case, I think this is a great night of action. As is normally the case with Abu Dhabi, we're getting a particularly good night of action, especially for a fight night. A fight night that, to me, looks more like a pay-per-view on paper, especially considering the one we just had. But hey, that's by the by. Whatever the case, this is going to be a great one. Make sure you tune in. Leave your comments down below. What fight are you looking forward to the most, and what are your predictions? Do you have any upsets for this one? Do you have any shocks? And how do you think that main event's going to go? Make sure you follow the page and subscribe to Calf Kick Sports. I've been Kian Lang, and let's have a good one this weekend. I think it's going to be